gustos y mis padres son de Mexico. Growing up with my parents, there's definitely pros and cons. I'd say that a good amount of pros are that I was shown a lot of what's out there at a really young age. A good aspect about it is, being able to connect with people who also are part of Mexican culture and stuff. I'd say the certain cons would have to be that since my parents actually came on them by themselves, we don't have any aunts or uncles that live here, so a lot of holidays and stuff like that, birthday parties have always been just my family. We can't visit my grandparents, which is kind of always a bummer. And there is always a feeling of being left out of certain things, especially because you're learning the culture. You're learning, the American culture along with your parents. I've definitely visited Mexico very young. Even when I was a baby, my parents always took me and to help me understand the culture and help me learn how to speak Spanish. And then as I got older, of course, I went during winter break or summer break. But my experiences there have always been good. I remember when I was younger and I kind of spoke of myself as being Mexican, my cousins didn't necessarily believe that to be so. They were like, "Oh, you're not Mexican enough," or they just said I wasn't Mexican at all. But that was just kind of like an innocent little thing that kind of came and went. But in terms of the actual trips, they've always been great. They've always been fun. Of course, going across the border, we always go through it by land in this border town called Laredo. So that's always an issue, but it's always been really fun. My dad came here because he ran out of money to support himself while he was at the university. He was studying to be an engineer, and so he decided to come to California and be a truck driver, work certain blue collar jobs that paid really well at the time. My mom actually lived only an hour away from a border town between Mexico and Texas, and so then what she did was to support her family. She would work in Texas in the border town and then come back each day to support her family and to fund her school. The only reason why they stayed here was because my dad was fixing up some income taxes that he had to do here in Michigan, in Detroit, and my mom was with a friend of hers who decided to take her to Detroit also, and so they happened to meet in a little restaurant that my mom was working at, and that's kind of how they decided to stay here. They got to know each other, and so then they decided to stay in Michigan and start a family.
السلام عليكم، اسمي فاطمة وتوت وأمي وأبويا من حلب بالعراق. I didn't know they were immigrants because I grew up in Dearborn and Dearborn Heights, and I went to primarily Arab schools. Christmas really stood out when I was younger because I lived in Dearborn Heights and a lot of Arab didn't live around me yet, and so I had white neighbors and they always had their trees up, and I as a kid you love the lights, and I loved Christmas lights, anything that twinkles. So I remember during the winter time, during from November to January, seeing the Christmas trees, and sometimes I would wait for it to get dark outside or just dark enough for them to put up their lights on the houses, and I would just sit outside on the grass and just watch their houses. We had a tree once, but that was because my sisters put it up, but my parents never put up trees. We never celebrated Christmas. I went to Iraq with my mom and my sister. I was really young, but I remember we stayed at my aunt's house in Hilla, where I'm from, and I remember just hanging out with my cousins a lot and feeding her dogs and sitting on the satah, which is the roof. A lot of the houses there just have people just hang out on the roofs. There's couches and there's beds and people sleep there and you can just hang out. My cousins were so fascinated, and my uncles and my aunts were so fascinated by the fact that we spoke English. So I remember the first night we were there, we were all sitting and all our uncles were sitting around it, me and my sisters, and they were okay, speak to us in English and we'll respond to you. We want to learn English. We didn't tell anyone if we went shopping or anything. We didn't speak in English in front of in the city or just outside the house. We didn't tell anyone that we were visiting because I think it was an issue with like the country. Like I don't remember why, but I remember my parents were just like, don't tell anybody or don't speak English in front of anyone. They left because of the Harab, and which is a war in Arabic, and the revolution that was going on in Iraq. My dad left before my mom. Like they were married at the time and they had they had my siblings, but my dad left before my mom, and he was in a refugee camp, which is called like Rafah in Arabic. He was there, and that's when my mom was still like he was in the military, and then he I think was in a refugee camp, and my mom was still living like in our hometown. And he would send her letters and like money for like bills and everything, and they would just contact each other through like written letters. And she came to America in '97, but before that she was in Jordan for like 3 years because she was waiting to get her green card to come here.
أنا اسمي زينة حب الله وأهلي من لبنان. Growing up with immigrant parents was great. It puts a sense of pride in you that you just want to work hard because they sacrificed everything to be here. My earliest memory of realizing my parents were immigrants was when I was about 5 or 6. My father was on the phone with one of his clients and he was speaking a different language, and it threw me off, and I asked my mother what he was speaking. So my parents were born and raised in West Africa, in Dakar, Senegal. So their second language was Wolof, which is one of the languages there. And that's the language he was speaking, which isn't something we speak at home. We speak Arabic at home. I have visited Lebanon before, but I have yet to visit West Africa. When I went to Lebanon, it was a very heartwarming experience. It was my first time going in 9 years. And you just feel like you're home for the first time. It's a feeling that's really hard to explain. A lot of my family actually doesn't live there. They live all around the world. And we all come together in the summer and we go to my grandparents' house. The older I get, it becomes a little harder to relate to people who don't come from an immigrant family or who don't come from an Arabic family, because if you don't have an open mind, it's hard to relate to people who are from different descendants than you. And having immigrant parents makes you a lot more open-minded to different aspects of the world and different types of people, whereas not having it just kind of closes you off. My parents lived in Kuwait, and while they were living in Kuwait one summer, the war happened. When the war happened, they had to leave, and then they ended up in Lebanon. After they went to Lebanon, they couldn't live there, so they went to West Africa in Dakar, Senegal. They lived there, and my father and mother felt like it wasn't going to be a good life for us this way. It was hard to make money. So my father went to Canada, and they lived there as refugees. And we were about to get kicked out, and for 13 years, my father would apply for the Visa Lotto. And the 13th year, when we were about to get kicked out to go back to Africa, my father won, and that's how we came to America.
Dylan Arroyo, and my parents are from the Philippines. I didn't have a specific memory of realizing that my parents were immigrants. I just always knew. So growing up in a predominantly white town with predominantly white schools with basically all white friends, I just knew that my parents were immigrants just because my skin color looks different. My parents made sure I was assimilated into American culture, so it wasn't that hard for me apart from not looking white. My parents tried to incorporate American culture and Filipino culture all into me and my little brother's lifestyles. So obviously we eat Filipino food chicken adobo, or it's called pancit or lumpia, which is just egg rolls. But most of the things we do the same as normal Americans do. Watch a lot of basketball or football, and holidays are pretty much the same. We don't do something too out of what's considered normal here in America. A lot of Filipinos, they're kind of entranced, so to speak, with American culture just because it's so different. They're just kind of amazed but also confused sometimes. In the Philippines, they weren't poor, but they're not the richest of the rich where they would live comfortably. So my dad told me that he would still have to depend on his father, and my mom would still have to depend on her father, just for money here and there. Just not like, they wouldn't have to live under the same roof, but they would still be financially dependent on their parents to get like a car or like, say, like daily groceries. So they just wanted to move here to America, become nurses, just so that they can provide a better life for their children.
Embrini mas gentigega de mamin e babin e kamga Shqipëri. So for me it was kind of weird because I went to like a prominently Arabic elementary and middle school, so like they were kind of the different looking parents from like what I was used to, but then like going to like more diverse like high school, I realized that they are pretty different from like what most kids' parents were. My family doesn't speak English at home, so that's like one thing. Like out in public, like my parents will speak in Albanian to me. There would just be like certain things that like, you know, they would want me to do and not do, whereas like, you know, my friends kind of had more freedom in a way. And I wasn't allowed to like sleep over anywhere maybe until like my senior year of high school. Like I would always have to be home pretty much like before like 10 o'clock, I would say, and like anything after that would be a problem. Like others would look at me and they would just see like just a normal like white boy, I guess. And that kind of is the case, but it kind of isn't the case. Like there's a little bit more like culture behind me, I would say. Like I said, my family doesn't speak English at home. Like most people just assume like white people are Christian. So like when I would tell kids that my family's Muslim, they would like kind of be like, what? Like there's no way. Or I don't know, it was kind of weird for me, I guess, just in the sense that like I was kind of the minority like growing up, but in general like I'm not a minority, so it's like weird, I guess. You know, they still talk about like back home and like how they used to live, and like they always like tell stories and stuff, but they really came here, I guess, to like give a better life for themselves and like planning to have kids like us too.
Привет, меня зовут Anastasia и моя mama is Ukraine. One thing that was different from others growing up was the words that we used, specifically like oatmeal and underwear. Me and my sisters didn't know what underwear was, like we always just called it trusiki, and we called oatmeal kasha. I don't know if that was our mom not knowing the language, or if that was her trying to teach us her language, but I have a feeling that she just didn't know the words for it. We have a lot of the matryoshkas at our house, like the nesting dolls. I was so interested in taking them apart and putting them together, and like I'd always ask my mom to take out the matryoshkas so I could play with them. So I guess that's different too, because nobody plays with that. I visited my mom's country for the first time this summer, and I had a really good experience because I was able to meet my grandpa and my step-grandma for the first time, and also just like see where my mom grew up. And we also visited the capital, Kiev, and I think that was really nice because I don't know, it was just like a busy city compared to my mom's city, which was also busy, but it's like it's not as rich. And I don't know, I just liked seeing like the different kind of foods and like hearing the language all around me, and I liked like reading the signs. All the signs were in Cyrillic, so it's good practice. For the most part in the big cities, everyone spoke English to us, like they wanted to speak English, but like other parts of the town, like more in my mom's city, we weren't allowed to speak English very loudly. Like if we were going on the subway, we couldn't speak, or like, I don't know, just like in kind of sketchier parts, we weren't allowed to speak English just in case so we don't get targeted. Personally, I haven't struggled fitting in like in America because like I'm pretty Americanized. I feel like fitting into my mom's friends, like more Ukrainian Russian culture was hard because like we don't speak the language, and I just feel like everyone was kind of close with each other. and we were just like American kids. All her friends' kids spoke Russian. So for us, we would go there and they'd speak Russian to their parents, and then like we were the only ones that didn't know what anyone was saying. So it's kind of harder to fit in that sense. My mom's main reason to come to America was basically like just to change her life, because life in Ukraine, especially like when she was growing up, because it's former USSR, it wasn't really that it wasn't rich, and it just wasn't a good lifestyle, especially to raise kids, like, or like have a job, anything really. So she wanted to come here, and then that would give a better life for her kids, so they don't have the same kind of childhood she did, and also give her a better life because she could find a more stable job, and then probably like possibly take care of her parents better when they're in Ukraine, and it would just be a lot more healthy for her.
My name is Alina Morgan,
Jonathan Morhan.
and our mom is from Romania.
The Romanian community, they all kind of know each other. So my uncle, my mom's brother, introduced my mom and my dad to each other. And my uncle and my dad knew each other because they worked together in stucco, so construction. My dad's family was actually sponsored by a church in Arizona, and they moved to Arizona. And from Arizona, they went to Georgia, from Georgia to Michigan. They said that in America it was a really hard life, and they, coming from some point so low, they really wanted to work and get somewhere, and that's why they wanted to come to America. A Romanian tradition for sure is sarmale. Every holiday you'll see cabbage rolls, feasts on the table. I really did like being raised traditionally, like raised eating veggies and foods and stuff. I have a very vivid memory of my grandma like shaking me to eat mushrooms. So love mushrooms now.
So our mom actually didn't even graduate high school. She actually never went to high school. Me and him have actually been in between traditional public schools and then cyber school. So my mom pushed us to graduate, but just to graduate. She never really wanted us to be like academically achieving our goals.
I think having immigrant parents is harder for girls than it is for guys.
For sure. Because in our religion, in our, the Romanian community, we like to meet when we're young and then get married young and have kids young.
Yeah.
Our cousin actually got married at 17, a week after she turned 17.
Yeah.
So they think that when you're dating other people outside of your culture, you guys won't understand each other, and there'll be many fights, and then divorce. But again, I'm more Americanized than the rest of my family. Like, he was allowed to come home whenever he really wanted to, but the minute I stayed like past 11 p.m., my mom would like text me like, "No, I can't sleep because you're on my mind. I'm worried about you." We actually started learning Romanian probably by my uncle. Every time we would go, so my dad lived on a farm with his family, his grandparents, and my aunt and her husband. And every time we would visit, her husband, our uncle, would start yelling at us to speak Romanian only inside of the house.
I would say I learned throughout my childhood because constantly our mom would like speak to us in Romanian, and then you just kind of pick up the language, learn how to speak it yourself. And I work with a lot of Romanian guys at work with my dad's family, so I had no choice unless I don't want to communicate with them.
I'm Gabriela Skozin. My parents are both from Poland. My dad came to America first, and it was because Poland was like a communist country at the time. So like they were trying to like escape that. And he actually like traveled from Poland to Austria, and he lived there for like 2 years or something. And then he came to America. And then my mom like followed. They met in Poland though, and then like she came here with him. I visited Poland throughout my whole life. The most recent trip was 2 summers ago, and it was cool because I feel like I went there and I was like more mature, so like the experience was completely different. I really appreciated reconnecting with my cousin because we're the same age, but like I feel like I lived my whole life and I didn't know her, and it was crazy because when we got together, there was like all these little things that we do, and we're like, wow, we're the same person. So it was like, I don't know, it was very like wholesome. I was with my family, so they took me in, and like it was very comforting. But like The issue that I had when I was over there was that I wasn't really able to communicate as much as I wanted to unless like my brother was around or like my cousin who speaks both Polish and English, or my dad. So it was like, yeah, I'm hanging out with my grandma right now, my babcia, but she's telling me all this stuff and like I can't really like I can only say a few words back to her. So I think like that's really frustrating. As I was growing up, I was completely surrounded by like the Polish community, and like we went to church every Sunday and we went to the masses that were like spoken in Polish, and we hung out with like all the Polish friends who were also immigrants, and like that's how I met my childhood friends. And then when I went to school, it was like, oh, there's like different kinds of people that are different than me, type of thing. I don't want to say that I struggled with fitting in, but I feel like my relationships with people around me definitely was impacted by the fact that like I'm the first generation. So I feel like I relate to other people who are also first generation. People that are like part of a minority are always very thrown off by the way that I am, because they look at me and they're like, oh, you're white, so you're like privileged and stuff. And like, yeah, I'm white, like there are like issues with that, but then they're like, but you know, you're so different than other people because you're like understanding and like I don't know, just like along those lines. And I think it is because my parents are immigrants and I was raised in a different way.